Okay, we are live on Facebook. Hello to all of our Merrick patrons, viewers near and far. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I am your, as always, very grateful host, Caroline Tack. I am coming to you live from Merrick Library. This is the Top Shelf Live broadcast. We have an amazing guest tonight. Amazing guest tonight. Author Denny S. Bryce is joining us tonight to talk about her debut. Look at this cover, Wild Women and the Blues.
Oh, I keep forgetting I always have it behind me.
Just so happens to be there. So
Yeah.
Denny Bryce, through the wonders of technology, please allow me to welcome you to the Merrick Library. I am so happy to see you and host you here.
Oh, thank you so much. I am thrilled to be here. It's been quite the whirlwind bunch of activity, with this being my debut novel, my first book out in the world. And it's been out in the world almost 3 months. Well, 3 months and another 3 weeks. But there's a lot of positive energy about the book, great feedback from readers. We made some fun lists that were really complimentary toward the book. So I've been very, very much excited and gratified by everything that has been happening and continues to happen. In fact, I have my first in-person event this weekend in North Carolina with Book Sparks, and that will be my first live event as a published author.
Can you, I mean, this is
bookmarks.
And will readers be able to see that, or you're going to be there in person? They're not filming.
We're going to be there in person, and it's not being streamed.
Got it. Now, as you said, the reception for the book is just, it's like everyone's hair is on fire. Stephanie Dre calls it, she's a best-selling author, ambitious, stunning. Ellen Marie Weissman, she's the best-selling author of The Orphan Collector. She's like, it's vibrant. It's a highly entertaining read. One of my favorite, though, reviews is from Oprah Magazine. And they say the music practically pours out of the pages of Denny S. Bryce's historical novel, set among the artists and the dreamers of the 1920s. I couldn't have said it better. And my pitch for this historical jazz wonder will not do Wild Women and the Blues justice. So I'm going to turn the floor over to you. Please tell listeners and viewers about this amazing book.
Well, I will start by saying Wild Women and the Blues, as I said before, is my debut novel, historical fiction. It is the story, I tell it in a dual timeline. And so I have a story going on in 1925 about a woman named Honorée Dalcour. She's 19 years old. She's a chorus girl. She lives in the Black Belt, or Bronzeville, in Chicago. And she is striving to make her mark on the stage and move uptown, if you will, but actually it's just across town, to State Street, and a black and tan nightclub called the Dreamland Cafe. Now, as that story unfolds, in 2015 Chicago, a young, well, actually he starts out in Santa Monica, California, but a young man he's grieving. He's a young film student. He's grieving over a tremendous loss. And so he wants to get his life back on track. He really does want to accomplish that. And before he sets out to go to Paris, he hangs out with his grandmother, hangs out in her attic, finds a box of a reel of film, a lot of photos of the subject matter for his film that he's working on as part of his thesis, Oscar Michaud. And there's a woman in all these photos. And on the back of the photos is a name, Honorée Dalcour, and a phone number, but not one of those old-fashioned phone numbers where they used to go Victory 478.
Right. UL4, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it was just so strange. But it's like, 312. So he calls the number, area code and phone number, and he's connected to a senior living facility where a Honoré Dalcour is one of the people in the facility. So on his way to Paris, he decides to stop by, talk to her about these photos and her connection to Oscar Michaud.
And
These two
honestly,
stories have a
that
way to
is,
come together.
you
Mhm.
guys can't even believe what Denny is telling you right now is only the beginning of this journey that you're going to take on this for this book. I told Denny earlier that when I finished the book, I closed the page that I was by myself sitting outside and I had no one to tell. Oh my gosh, I just finished this book. I picked up my phone and I start texting people because it's just, even you're telling it, retelling it to all of us right now is just, it's giving me the chills. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. Tell me about the inspiration for the book. When you get those angels speaking in your ear and about this particular story, who speaks to you first? Is it Honoré? Is it Bessie? Is it Sawyer, the guy we were just talking about?
Yeah,
Who
sorry.
like whispers in your ear first, or how does the muse come to you?
Well, to me, maybe it's because of my journalist background. I don't
Yes.
know if characters come to me or if I um, erect them. Okay, so part of my fascination with the 1920s has to do with my maternal grandmother who came to this country from Kingston, Jamaica in 1923. And she was rather elderly when I was a little girl. And she had all these photos everywhere around the house of old pictures of her in, fancy clothes and a very nice car. And I'd ask her questions about, what's all this stuff? And
And
she,
how old were you, would you say, like when you were
oh, I
asking?
was probably 4 or 5 years old.
Wow. Yeah.
I was just incredibly nosy. And I used to put on another thing too. It was a crazy family, but I used to put on shows. My brother and I would, when for family gatherings, and as young as 4, 5, and 6, we'd put on performances and everybody just sit around and just like, okay, the kids are coming here. The grandbabies are here and they're
Yeah.
But aside from that aspect of everything, there were 2 other keys to getting this story going and sort of kickstarting my what if, and analysis of story development. The other one was years ago when I was a dancer. I was a professional dancer, and so that's another aspect of the story, because the chorus girl Honoré is a dancer in 1925. I was working, as many dancers do, as a waitress at a nightclub called The Cookery in the Village, and East Village. And the headliner when I was there was a woman named Alberta Hunter. The name may be familiar because I mention her in the book.
Yes, you do.
Because she's a 1920s blues singer, very famous during her time. When I met her, she was in her 80s and she was making a comeback. And she was making a comeback to, I think the owner of this place called The Cookery was a man by the name of Barney Josephson, who owned Cafe Society.
Wow.
Where Billie Holiday first sang Strange Fruit. So I really, at the time, because I'm essentially a kid running around New York pretending that I'm going to be a superstar, I didn't connect. But then many years later, I'm like, wow, I knew her. We used to talk. I used to bring her tea before her performances. And another reason she stood out is because I made big bucks every weekend she worked, because the whole place would just fill with just fans of old school blues. And she just sit at the piano. It was her piano and a microphone. And she was phenomenal. So she sort of stuck in my head.
I can't keep my mouth closed. My mouth just hit the floor. The story that you're telling, that's incredible.
It was really cool. I mean, it's all in hindsight, believe me. the Denny at that point in time in her life was not really paying that much attention to where she worked. She was just glad to have a job and
Yeah.
dancing all day and all this sort of stuff. But years later, I remember watching, she passed away. I think she passed away when she was almost 90. And I was like, and they mentioned the cookery and all this sort, and there was some other stuff that I was doing at the cookery at the time. So she was an important thing in the back of my head that I think I pulled forward when I started looking at the 1920s.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there was one other thing that happened that you might have seen on Facebook several years ago. A woman named Alice Barker was, she was in a senior care facility, and a young man brought her a video and showed it to her. So she was in her, I think she was 103. Showed her a video of her dancing in the 1930s or 40s. And there was just that moment when she sees herself, and then you see her. And I was like, wow, what, that would be interesting. So I sort of plucked from different places, and that's where it sort of kickstarted the
Which
idea.
is so all of that now brings the whole book crystallizes for me, and your lush, gorgeous descriptions of the costumes, the dresses, the coats, the hats, and the jewelry.
Yeah.
I mean, it was all so. This book is so colorful. Like, I just kept seeing everything, your descriptive language. It's just incredible. I mean, I kept seeing all of the pearls and again, this cover. Who did you have any?
I have to give, well, let me tell you the cover process, because and then I will give credit where credit is due. We looked at 3 or 4 treatments, and myself, my editor, the team at Kensington Books, and it wasn't hitting the right chord. And then they sent me an image, and it was this gal. And
Oh my goodness.
an artist had put together something, and we all went, yeah, that's it. And so the credit for the cover goes to Christine Mills, who is the director of the entire, visuals over Kensington over there. And the cover illustration is by Sarah Knott, N-O-T. So those 2 women were really the ones who found it. And then all they had to do was put the name of the book and my name over it, and we were ready to go. Ready to go.
And there it is, Denny.
There it is.
There it is. So when you saw this for the first time, did you let out a big whoop? Did you say, oh my gosh, that's...
It's funny with me, and because of my background in marketing and PR, I've looked at a lot of graphics. I've worked with advertisers, and I've worked with visual artists quite a bit. I looked at it, and the thing that struck me immediately was the length of her back and her neck and the angle of her head and the shoulders. That's a dancer right there. You can just tell the energy of the pose. And all of that just worked for me. I saw that. Green is not my favorite color. So I was like, everybody loved it. And I was like, whatever. But I loved her back and just her, she's thinking. That's a person in motion. And I thought that worked really well with the story.
Well, especially since Honoré is usually walking purposefully. And she is, she's got her eye everywhere else. As a matter of fact, speaking of that, I have a quote. She says, I don't daydream, I make plans.
Yeah.
And I thought we need that on a t-shirt. We need one of those planes that go across the beach to say, to have one of those planes with the signs just to say, I don't daydream, I make plans. And those 2 sentences, that is Honoré.
Very much so. And also it ties so nicely into the theme, which is about dreams versus getting something done. and accomplishments, because her goal is to work at the Dreamland Cafe.
Right.
So it's an interesting play on the thought process of dreams. And then you have Honoré in 2015, who's a bargain gal. She wants to make a bargain with Sawyer. You know, one of the quotes that I think was on the back cover said, "Why would I talk to you about my life? I don't know you. And even if I did, I don't tell my story to just any boy with long hair who probably smokes weed. You want to hear about me? You got to tell me something about you to make this worth my while." And this is Honoré in 2015 at 110. Her power is her age and what she knows, and she knows that. So,
Oh my gosh.
like
Honestly, folks, wait, just wait. I don't even know how to express what I want to say coherently. But the other thing that's amazing about this book is it's almost like TMZ going back to the 20s.
yeah,
So you mentioned Alberta Hunter,
right.
and we've got Louis Armstrong, and we have Lil Hardin
Yeah,
Armstrong, and you've got Oscar Michaud. And I just felt like, oh my gosh, when there's that scene where they go to the house
yeah, yeah.
and they kind of crash that party. And I'm telling you, you're going to have to read it to find out what I'm talking about. But boy, to be because there are so many people at this party.
Yeah, it's a house full. Oh, Cab Calloway is there too.
Yeah, so I
Um,
mean,
just a few faces. What I loved about research, just to throw this out there, I worked a lot. Well, I worked with the Library of Congress. I spent a lot of time in Chicago at the Harold Washington Library with archivists and librarians. They were just so fabulous in going the extra mile, because they have the knowledge and access to their collections and things like that. So they'll sit and listen to you, and then they'll point you in the right direction or bring in a cart with a whole bunch of stuff that you can just go through. But they really help tremendously. But one of the things in working with the Chicago Defender, which is one of the oldest African-American newspapers in the country, and going through their archives, back in the day when they had a news story, they'd print your address in the newspaper. Sometimes they put your phone number. And blankety blank of 3547 State Street said, and it was, so I mentioned their address at the time. It was in the newspaper.
And I love that whole piece of when you talk about reading the articles and listening to things on the radio. It's just, it places the reader firmly in the location, in Bronzeville, on State Street, on the Stroll. And just speaking about fashion and the way it's such a, that in itself is also like a character in the book. The woman I do social media with was just like, oh my gosh, you have to tell Denny how much I love her cover. So that's from Michelle, the social media person, who's like, I love her cover. And just, I'm looking at some of the comments. Ann Kin is watching now, and she says, look at the two of you with your fashionable glasses.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you,
love
Ann.
my fashion glasses because I can't see otherwise. So they have to be cute. Otherwise, we got to do all of these virtual moments. And both of us, my glasses, yours are pink, and I had pink, but these change colors according to my lighting.
Well, I'm looking because I thought they were kind of rainbowy, because every time you move, they change color. That's great.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, let's do that.
Yeah, it picks up.
The only thing they haven't figured out, at least for me, is how to make sure you don't have the circle light. So I have a long light.
Oh, that's smart.
Someone told me, Adrienne Michelle, I will give her a shout out, was the one who introduced me to this light.
Good job.
Right.
Good job. One of the things we just talked about, we're talking about fashion, we're talking about this Chicago jazz scene in the 20s. I had never heard of the Stroll.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about the Stroll? Because to me, that's just going right back in time. But having said that, I was doing that walk. I was with those women. It was really something else.
I'll tell you honestly that that was part of my research.
Oh, it was.
I was not familiar with Chicago. That, I mean, most of the stuff that you get from history and Chicago in the 20s is centered on Al Capone, or it's a retelling of The Great Gatsby. And those are not the story. That wasn't the story I was looking for. I really wanted to put the African American community in the forefront of the story. So that meant I had to, part of my research process is definitely to begin with, how do people make money? The people that I want to talk about, what is their economic situation? So of course I dove in and recognized, and was not surprised by the poverty in the community, but also the wealth in the community. One of the fuels of income, if you will, was policy gambling. In addition, there were banks that were built on policy gambling. There were businesses throughout State Street, around 3,500. Well, the Dreamland Cafe, if I recall correctly, was at 3520 State Street. And so this long series, this block where all of these Black businesses were located, was called the Stroll. And these Black businesses, don't think in terms of, grocery store, retailer establishments. No, it was a combination of church fronts, and nightclubs and speakeasies and bars and businesses. So everything happened on the Stroll. And Lil Hardin was known as Queen of the Stroll, because she liked to dress up and just walk up and down State Street. Langston, the poet, Langston Hughes, poet author, wrote that the thing about State Street was midnight was daylight. No matter when you went on the Stroll, it was probably a sort of like a different version of Vegas. It was just everything was happening all the time. So.
But it sounded amazing. And, there's so many things in this book. So there's a lot to uncover. And I really want the readers to come to it as organically as I did. But there were so many things that I immediately went to the internet to look up. The Stroll and policy gambling. I had never heard of that. I had never heard of, wait, where is it? There was something else I wanted to.
Well, just a quick thing about policy gambling.
Yes, please.
Term for it was running the numbers. It was the numbers racket. And it eventually evolved into what we know now as the lottery system. Very much the basics of policy gambling had to do with the lottery, or evolved into the lottery. And then the other element, I think, running the numbers was probably around until the 70s in certain major markets. So that, you just put a few pennies down, get your tickets at these little, storefronts.
Right.
In the community, and there you go. So it really was also in Chicago a line drawn in the sand, because the deal was the community, the Black Belt, would buy bootleg liquor from Capone, but he couldn't move in on their gambling operation.
That whole piece of the book was just like, I could see the movie, I could just see all of the players. I mean, it was such a visual experience.
I hope someone from a studio is listening.
We'll make sure. Don't worry, we'll make sure.
Okay.
The other thing, so there's so many things about this book that make it quality historical fiction, which means that I was learning as I read and then looking for more information as I read. I did not know about Red Summer.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah,
I did the dive on that,
1919.
and I was
Mhm.
grateful that you had, because especially since we just got through, this was a big month for the Tulsa, Oklahoma. Everybody was talking about that again, thank goodness. But I thought, oh my gosh, we should be talking about this too. But I didn't
And I
know.
think there was an article recently that made the point that Tulsa was just one of many
Yes.
incidents throughout the United States where Black communities were victimized and or destroyed or murdered, um, in these. And the Red Summer in 1919 was a situation in Chicago, if I recall my history correctly, where a young African American boy was on the beach, and supposedly he struck someone or something happened like that. Probably not the case. He was
Right.
just on the beach.
Yep. Yep.
And so madness ensued from there, because there was always racial tension regarding who could use a public beach. But that in 1919 was an explosive year, because I always mention that the Ku Klux Klan had sort of, I don't want to say disappeared from the front page of America, but in 1915, a film by the name of Birth of a Nation,
Right.
made by D.W. Griffith, um, really put the Klan as saviors, and depicted African Americans, in particular African American males, as just super violent rapists who needed to be handled, etc. So it talk about propaganda films.
Yep.
And that's how Oscar Micheaux really, built his energy, because his thing was, no, I'm going to make films that show African Americans in entertainment, not something that is exploitive or derogatory or negative about the race, but a story worth watching. And all of his cast were African American, and his films, that he was doing films, from silent films all the way through talkies. But
And
in my
again, didn't know that much about him, have heard
okay.
him, seen it on the PBS documentary. Again, I do this deep dive. So you wrap all of this incredibly informative material around this story of Honoré and what she's experiencing, not just in Bronzeville, not just in her community, but then you take that step back and you give the reader the global outlook of what's going on in the United States at the time. So
Right.
honestly,
It's
Denny, Bryce, what are you doing? I mean, for heaven's sake, you're killing me. It's so good.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that. It's because you sit with these stories for a minute or two. I know I did on this one, not as much time on this next one, but I just sort of say that real fast.
Your
But
editor's not watching.
and you never know. She's
Yeah.
everywhere.
I'm gonna
Okay.
get the call, the text on my phone.
What were you doing on that? What were you doing on that show last night? I
What'd
don't
you
know.
say to Carolyn anyway?
It wasn't me.
Exactly. Also, the other thing you do is there's a scene between two characters, and they're sort of debating the thesis of W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington. And I
Oh,
just, that was such a
yeah.
great scene.
Well, there some of the history that definitely, although Booker T. Washington passed away, I believe, in 1910 or 1915. My dates may be a little wrong there. And Booker T. and W.E.B. Du Bois was certainly around longer. They just had different philosophies and approaches to both of them very serious men about supporting and helping the race. They just came about it from different philosophies, but and then had some disagreements, I think. Again, you're testing my history recollection, because there's so much information. I am not a historian. I will admit that freely. I am a history geek, and also have a approach to research, because it's sort of like marketing data. You have your secondary and your primary research, and you look at your information, you put it in certain categories and places so that you are able to draw upon it. And then again, looking at communities, and there's some fabulous books that I was able to grab hold of. And also I had the advantage of listening to music from the time period and really paying attention to those lyrics and the blues in particular, and how women approached, from the Bessie Smiths and Alberta Hunters and the Ida B. Cox and all of these different performers that didn't always use a microphone, so they're belting for real, and smoky speakeasies, and so it was fun. It was fun doing that deep dive.
And it like historical fiction, it's educating without I don't know what's the
It's not a textbook. It's not meant to be a textbook.
correct. And so I went, I looked up all of this stuff. It's just such a wonderful book. We are running a little bit out of time, but I also wanted to just mention, again, we talked about Honore. She says, I don't daydream, I make plans. I love that about her. She is amazing. I love that the book is in 2 timelines. I think that's probably very hard to do structurally. And I know that you mentioned earlier that you were a journalist and a writer and public relations and marketing. Do you think that producing that kind of content helped or hindered you in any way writing this book? Because it is very tight. It is very concise, to the point. Those pages flip, flip, flip. And it's very really beautifully structured. So I'm wondering if that helped you when you were writing.
It's a catch-22, frankly.
Yeah.
Because you spend a lot of time tightening things. I mean, when you're doing marketing and advertising, the goal is to catch attention, grab it, move on. So you don't go into a lot of detail or I'm always editing when I was doing PR and marketing, because the tighter the story, or not even story, the headlines, because you're dealing with headlines. The other thing that contributes to my process was that I spent years writing fan fiction. So with fan fiction, I was able to just let go. So in the day, and I used to, when I was running my PR and marketing firm, that's what I did to relax, was write fanfic. And this was before I had, serious aspirations of writing full time as a professional writer. And I think that combination, because I'm always conscious of the marketing approach to writing, which is distinctly different from novel writing. But fanfic helped me get out of the stiffness that can happen with marketing and PR when you try to transfer it, because it's technical writing.
Right.
It's technical writing.
And as I said, this book is so lush with your descriptions, and it's so beautiful, and the peacock fans, it's really just crushing on the book very seriously right now. So but I just wanted, before I let you go, I have 2 questions. Where can readers find you? Where can listeners find you, viewers find you on social media? Because I'm sure you're going to be doing all kinds of events.
It's fabulous that Denny S. Bryce is my Instagram handle, is my Twitter handle, is my website address. So that's one way of finding me. As for the book itself, it is available wherever books are sold, including through Bookshop for independent bookstores. I'm a big advocate of looking at independent bookstores, but we're also in Target, in Barnes and Noble, in Walmart, in what's that other place we're in? Wegmans. I know, it's like Wegmans. Okay, I don't care where you buy it.
Who cares?
And then of course it's on Amazon and iBooks, also on iBooks, Apple.
And I wish I actually had a copy, but all my copies are off the shelf because once we announced that this was going to happen, there were no copies. So that's why. So you can pick it up, add it to your to read list. You can put it on reserve at the local library, or please shop at your local independent bookstore.
Oh, absolutely.
We
The
need to
library.
support them too. So you've got a couple of options here. What is next for you?
Well, as I
If
mentioned,
you can say, if you can
I
say,
can say because I think it was announced. In fact, in my book, in Wild Women in the Blues, the
yes.
first chapters or scenes from Blackbirds are that's the next book. It is another historical fiction, another dual timeline. The dual timeline is 1928 and 1968. I have a gal named Daisy Washington, who in 1928 has some things happen to her in Los Angeles, where she is a chambermaid at the hotel that initially was one hotel and became the Dunbar Hotel later. And then in 1968, a woman slightly before her 60th birthday is making a cross-country trip from Chicago to LA with her estranged niece. And their trouble ensues as they get on the road during a very volatile summer, and surprises happen. And then there's what is the connection between her 28 story and her 68 story.
And how long do we have to wait for this?
April 26th,
Oh,
2022
okay.
is when it's coming out. So it's on its
Okay.
way.
April
As I
20.
do some things.
Just a few things, but okay, at least I know it's we have a date, a launch
Yeah,
date.
we have a date. We've had a date now, I think for a month.
It's probably good for us, but maybe not so much for you.
We'll talk about that next time.
Well, Denny, thank you so very much for being here. I was really thrilled to spend time with you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I really, really enjoyed. I enjoyed talking about the book, but I really appreciate you reaching out to me because it's fun and I wanted to chat.
This is great.
Wonderful.
Thank you. I hope you'll come back in April of 2022. God willing,
before we know it.
Yeah.
Before we know it,
before we know it, right? Well, everybody out there, Merrick Library patrons, everybody, thank you for joining us this evening. It's always a pleasure to bring authors right to your laptop or to your phone or however you're watching. I appreciate that you spent time with us. I know there are a lot of other viewing options up there. If you haven't watched Mayor of Easttown yet, I guess, we appreciate you joining here. Remember, everybody, to keep your eyes on our summer reading program, which is signing up starts soon. And we have a very special guest author for that as well. So, but I'll keep that a secret until the time comes. So keep your eyes open for that. Denny S. Bryce, Wild Women and the Blues. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I mean, it was amazing. It was just amazing. I am so appreciative. Now, here comes the fun part. I have to remember how to log off. So don't go anywhere because I have to remember. There we go. Stop fishing. All right, everybody. Thank you so much.
Bye.